welcome to part 3 of the DBD Lore of the killers. And the next one is Spirit. Spirit is very good. I think she's listed as quite a hard character because she does take a lot of practice to learn how to play as her. But she can also be very difficult to play against. I've only played as her once or twice and it's very difficult. But some people can, get the hang of it so quickly. So, before the events of Dead by Daylight, Spirit was called Rin Yamayaka. And she was a young girl. And she was raised mainly with the family. And her mother got very sick. And she had to go into hospital quite a lot. And that meant that obviously lots of hospital bills just piled up. And her father had to work very hard to kind of get by. He took on a job, but it was long hours. He would work overtime. And Rin was working, I think, at a restaurant. And it put a lot of strain on the father in particular because he was doing so much whilst worrying as well. And one day he started taking it particularly badly, and there was more trips to the hospital. So he went to his superior and basically begged if he could have a bonus or extra hours or anything that could help. And the superior, the boss, actually said they'd been trying to sell a defective product and it was costing them hundreds, trying to sort it out. And they had to blame someone, and it just so happened that the blame fell on the father, and he just went crazy, with the stress and everything. Then, I don't know if it was the same day, Rin had been working late at the restaurant and she got home and she was drawn by a scream coming from her parents' bedroom. And when she got there, she found a terrible sight, and the mother unalived. And as she went to call the police, the father went for her and he made a mess, basically. It was terrible. And just before anything happened, Rin swore an oath to herself to get revenge, which is where the whole becoming a killer kind of comes from. And as I said, she's a very good character. She can be quite frightening because she does something called phase walks, where she walks and she goes invisible, so you don't know she's there. You can just hear her breathing, which is very scary. So her map is the Yamayaka estate map, and there is some people making mention of her being related to the Oni, which is another DBD killer, but I'm not quite sure whether that's the case. I think so. But yeah, she's a very, very good killer. Okay, the next lore I wanted to mention is the Legion, which is actually 4 people. It's Frank, Susie, Julie and Joey. And they form the Legion together. And in the actual game, a lot of people don't particularly like the Legion, but they can be very good when used the right way. So it started with Frank, and Frank was he was kicked out. Well, he wasn't kicked out. He stopped attending school early on because he was part of the basketball team, and he started to fight with the referee and got kicked out. So that kind of started off. He was a bit of a troublemaker in that sense. And from a young age, he was pretty much fostered from place to place. He never had anywhere that stuck. And then he was fostered by someone and taken to Ormond, which is his map, the Ormond Resort. And it was a small town, but there was a resort on the hills, and he would spend time there with his friends that he made, which were the other three. And they would spend time there, and Frank wanted to make strength out there, what was seen as weaknesses, because it was like bad. So he would get the others to steal. Like, he would get involved as well, but he was more the ringleader, and it was about stealing, vandalism, things like that. And this one day, he was fired from a shop, so he ordered the others to vandalise it, because they fired him. So they went in to do that, and it was supposed to be empty, but the cleaner was still there. So out of fright, when the cleaner realised that there were these 4 people closing in on them, they grabbed Julie and threatened to hurt Julie if he didn't let them go. And then Frank just saw red and unalived the cleaner straight away, to protect his friends, because that's how much they've come to mean to him. And I forgot to mention, they all wear like masks to hide their identity when they're doing bad things. But they did that, and they decided they were going to dig a hole in the mud, and they were going to have the cleaner there. I think that was in Ormond. So they were doing that, and while that was happening, Frank saw something moving in the forest near them. So he grabbed his knife and gave chase to whatever it was that he could see, and the others followed him like they always did. And no one ever saw any of them again. They had no idea what became of them. And I think that's very interesting, because it kind of gives a bit more of a backstory to why, it was such a warm place, that Ormond Resort, but it also felt very ominous as well. It always feels ominous when you go to that map, and the killers are, it would seem like they're very weak, but they can be very strong when used properly. The next one I wanted to speak about was the plague, which is a very good killer. Again, there's a bit of a learning curve if you want to play as her, but she is very good at downing all the survivors and doing what she needs to do. So the plague was originally called Audrey. As a baby, she was left on the steps of the Temple of Purgation, which is her map. But she was left on the steps, and as she grew older, she was very upset because she couldn't understand why she'd been left and what reason her parents had and things. She kind of threw herself into anything to do with the temple, setting ceremonies, prayers, tending the gardens, things like that. And she felt like she finally found a reason, something that made her happy. In the meantime, over the walls of the temple, the plague was starting to infect everybody, and people were coming to the temple to be cleansed. And it was getting to the point where there was more people than they could handle. There was so much happening. And Audrey went down into the bottom of the temple where she found a hidden crypt, and it was said there she found the answer to everything that she needed to do. So she gathered everyone in the centre of the temple for a speech, and there was this one woman, and she was very badly infected by the plague at that point, and she started swooning like she was going to faint. So Audrey rushed through the crowds to this woman, and she noticed her feet were covered in the black blisters that the plague would give you. So she cut off one of her own toes and offered it to the gods to appease them and help this woman. For doing that, people started recognising her as, very pure and innocent and everything like that. And eventually people would call her the High Priestess of Babylon, and she would have people following her, and she was finally where she'd always dreamed she would be. And then one day she noticed she was infected, and to appease the gods, she banished herself to the outer world, and she went walking, and she took a few of her followers with her, and they worked for as long as they could until they were all exhausted, and they all had the plague, and they rested in a cave, and that was as far as they could go. And with her last breath, Audrey prayed to the gods again, and no one found Audrey or any of her followers. They were never found again. And I think that's very, it sticks in your mind, a story like that. And as I said, in terms of the Dead by Daylight universe, she's a very good killer. She's strong, and she, when you've practiced enough, she's very good against survivors. The last one I wanted to speak about was the Oni, and his surname is actually Yamioka, which lends credence to what people say about him being related to spirits. So the Oni was originally a man called Kazan. His father was a very powerful samurai, and he taught Kazan all the different ways of being a samurai as he grew up, and he became very strong as well. But around that point, people were kind of ridiculing the name samurai. It was somewhat of a novelty to call yourself a samurai, even if you weren't actually one. You could just say you were one. So Kazan went on a pilgrimage to rid the world of people that would call themselves samurais, and they weren't. And he unalived farmers and everyone that he could find that did the same thing. And because of his strength and the brutal way that he did what he did, he earned himself the name Oni Yamioka, because so many people saw him as that, and it was seen as an insult to be called an Oni. So he just started unaliving the people still that would call themselves samurais, but he would also do the same to anyone that had called him an oni. And he became such a dangerous person everywhere he went when he had a morbid sense of humour. He's brutal. He earns such bad reputation. And then one day he found a village where there was a lord who gave him the name Oni and told everyone else to call him Oni as well. So he snuck into this village and unalived the lord, and the villagers that tried to stop him as well, they cast him out. They chased him away from the village. He ended up going into a forest and finding a statue of an Oni, and he was overcome with rage because he felt like it was ridiculing him, taunting him, all that kind of stuff. So he found, on his journeys, he found a samurai, someone with the correct armour and the headgear and everything. And he struck out at this samurai before, thinking. And it turned out the samurai was his father. But it was too late. By that point, he'd done so much damage that the samurai passed. And he felt so guilty and so upset with himself. But he could hear voices in his head. And one of them was his father's voice, and that was taunting him for becoming an Oni as well. And it made him angry too. And he was still being chased at this point. They found him while he was trying to get back to, his home. And they found him and they overpowered him. And they beat him black and blue. It was awful. And then they took him to an old mill. And they basically left him there until he passed as well. And that's where the Oni comes into the Dead by Daylight world as such a brutal killer. And he is a very good killer as well. Again, it's important to have some practice beforehand. A lot of people say it's best to work with a killer that's a bit easier in the beginning, and then move on to killers like Oni and things like that, because they have such a way that they fight that you have to get used to. I think I played as the Oni once or twice, and he's very difficult, but he's also a very good killer.